Being a custom knife maker, craftsman, and outdoorsman, sharpening is pretty much my job at this point. I sharpen all the time, so I figured I might be able to share some of that knowledge with you guys who are having trouble with your freehand sharpening. So let's get started. So I have a lot of sharpening videos online. If you want to check some of those out, click that link that's in the top corner of the screen there now, and you can go through a whole backlog of sharpening videos over the years. Now, because I have so much content online like that, I get a lot of questions almost on a daily basis, a lot of emails and Facebook messages asking me to identify certain problems with their sharpening, and basically it comes down to two main questions. Those two are, why can't I get a razor sharp edge? And why doesn't my edge last? So I'm going to address those two issues. What are the common mistakes people make, and how you might be able to identify what you're doing wrong and get a better edge. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to be using one of my customs here I just finished up. But let's get started out at the most basic part, and that is stone choice. Now this happens to be a Sharp Pebble stone. That's what we're going to be using in today's video. It was a gift from Sharp Pebble. If you want to check them out, go for it. I'll throw a link to their site in the description, I guess. They didn't ask me to review this or anything. They just sent it along as a gift. So thank you very much, Sharp Pebble, for providing the stone for this video. So stone choice, the most important thing is grit rating. So you want to start out with a grit that's effective. Now I started out sharpening with a 1000 grit stone. That's fine if your knife is not in very bad condition, but if it's in rough shape, you're going to want a coarser stone. 400 is a beautiful grit. You see, this is a 400 and 1000 grit combo stone, so we get both grits with this one stone. It's a fairly thick stone as well. You get a lot of life out of it, but a 400 grit works well. 1000. An important thing, since we're talking about grits here, is that you don't want too big of steps between your grits, or you're likely not to get out the scratches from the previous stones. So if you went from, say, a 400 to a 3000, you're gonna have to work really long on that 3000 grit stone to remove all the scratches from the 400, because the 3000 grit stone is just not coarse enough to cut away the material. So going from 400 to a 1000, and 1000 to a 3000, and then 3 up another few thousand grit. Those increments are small enough that you're going to efficiently remove those scratches and ensure you get a good edge. Now we're about to start sharpening, and we get to a few main questions. One is, can I do forward and back strokes? Absolutely. Do cutting strokes and stropping strokes. You don't need to lift off the stone and reset each time. That'll give you an issue with maintaining your angle. Now, angle, we're going to talk about, is the most common issue I see with people sharpening, is holding that angle. That is the whole skill and difficulty with freehand sharpening, is that your angle is not fixed for you. How do you find your angle when you start sharpening? So I recommend laying your blade flat on the surface. Notice that shadow under the blade. Now you're going to watch closely as you tip that blade up until the shadow disappears. Once that shadow disappears, you know there is no gap between your apex and the stone, and that's your sharpening angle. Now you need to hold that as good as possible while sharpening. If you need to keep checking, what I found is a good reference is to get up to that point and then just fit my finger under there. How much space is there under the spine of the blade? So I should be able to fit my finger in just about 1/4 of an inch there. Okay, so that's a good reference point, and you just try to maintain that all the way up along your edge, and that'll help you maintain the angle. But be cautious, be mindful when you're sharpening. Don't just start sharpening wildly then and not paying attention to your angle. You need to constantly be watching the distance between the spine of the knife and the stone, that shadow on your edge. Check constantly. Now, like I said, holding that angle is difficult. That is the whole skill with freehand sharpening. And I just want to briefly mention another issue I often hear, and that is people complaining about why their edges are not great. So yes, your edge is probably not great because you aren't holding that angle consistently enough. But don't expect yourself to get there overnight. I spent a lot of hours sharpening and getting poor edges just because I could not maintain that angle well enough. I've gotten lots of emails from people who have had their new stones for a couple days and they're wondering why they still can't get a razor sharp edge. It isn't that easy. It takes time, takes consistency, and you need to, like I said, be mindful while you're sharpening. What mistakes am I making? Am I holding that angle consistently? Next tip, picture a knife edge. Okay, so this is like a cross section of a knife blade. So here's your apex, here's your bevel on the opposite side of the knife. Okay, here's a piece of steel, the face of your blade with a lovely KN stamp. Okay, awesome. Now you're sharpening with 400 grit. Now that's going to create scratches on that blade like this. Picture this on a microscopic scale. We have these big 400 grit scratches. Now what happens is when you go over to a finer grit stone, you need to replace these scratches. So that's a 400 grit scratch. Now you're moving over to a 1000 grit and you need this. Now what happens, and what I've seen happen on different blades I've had come into me to be sharpened, is people aren't spending enough time on each stone. They're jumping to other stones. I get it, you're a little bit excited to get to the finish and see what your edge looks like, and you end up with a whole mixed bag of scratches on that blade. So you have some nice 1000 grit scratches, and then you might have missed a patch there, then you might have a few nice scratches and you miss a patch, and you end up with this spotty, ugly looking blade with not a nice finish, and your edge is really inconsistent. So you have little pieces and stuff, scratches, pieces of burr along your edge, and it's just not a nice finish. Take your time, take some pride in your work, and pay attention to what that edge is looking like. Feel very lightly along your edge and see if it's grabbing in certain places and where you might need a little more attention. Now let's say you've sharpened all the way up through your grits and you're getting to the very last step, so the last strokes. I always advocate your final strokes on a stone to be cutting strokes. All throughout the process, yes, you can do forward and back strokes, but you're going to draw a little wired edge, bird edge. A burr is what people call it in the sharpening community. And I find stropping strokes tend to really create that burr because you're pulling metal out to the edge a little more. So I like to finish with only cutting strokes, just like that. Pressure should lighten as your process goes through. So here now, finishing on the 8000, you shouldn't be using just as much pressure as you were using when you started on the 400, or even when you started on the 8000. I like to lighten my pressure constantly throughout the whole process. Okay, so we're assuming we've created a very beautiful edge here now at this point, up to an 8000 grit, which is a very high grit. Now, a lot of people stop here and they check their edge, and it's still not buttery, smooth, shaving hair sharp. I'm going to tell you, do not underestimate what a strop is capable of. I've had so many edges that just weren't quite there from the stones, that with just a half dozen passes on a strop, a leather strop with some polishing compound, just brought it to an A level, just to that buttery, smooth edge. A strap with some compound like that is less aggressive than a stone. It's soft on your blade, and it's going to convex a little and make sure to even out that edge where there might be those little inconsistencies that you left with your stone. A strap is really going to clean that up. Now, if you remember at the start of the video, I said there are two main issues people have with sharpening. One was that they're not getting that razor sharp edge, and two, the edge doesn't seem to last. Now let's address the second one about the edge not lasting. First off, an edge that comes to an absolute razor point is not going to keep that fine of an edge that long. You've created a very fine, delicate edge there, and you just can't expect it to stay hair shaving sharp if you're stripping wires with it and And even cutting up cardboard, people don't realize the abuse that an edge takes when you run through a cardboard with that abrasive granulate within. Cardboard has, I believe, like a type of clay material through in, which is very coarse and sandy. That's just brutal on an edge. So don't expect to be cutting up cardboard boxes and still coming and shaving your face at the end of the day, shaving your 5 o'clock shadow. It's just not going to happen. So I think a lot of times people have unrealistic expectations of their knife and the steel that they have. One other thing, I think, when we talked about that burr earlier, people are finishing the edge with that little burr left on there. And if you imagine that fine little wire of steel hanging off your edge, now that burr feels really sharp and grabby. When you slice through paper, it might even do a beautiful job of dicing off that piece of paper. But as soon as you go against something a little bit hard, like a piece of wood, or you come down even on a wooden cutting board, you flatten out that burr, or it breaks off, and then you're left with either a rolled edge on a very microscopic level, or you're left with a little crumbly edge or a rough edge. So that's what's happening. So make sure you get rid of that burr, and make sure you have realistic expectations of your knife steel. So that's it for this video, guys. If you liked it, please hit the like button. Comment down below if you have any other ideas other than what I addressed here in this video. Of course, there are lots of things that go wrong, but I just address what I think are the most common. Yeah, you guys that have some experience in sharpening, or if you're stuck on your issue as well, comment down below. I'll address your comment. Maybe we can help you out. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button. If you were real kind, you'd share. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.